Hi everyone, Trevor Jones from AstroBackyard here, and today I have a long overdue image processing tutorial for you. In my last video I mentioned how I would walk you through the steps I took to create my best astrophotography image ever, and that's what we're going to do in this video. I wanted to say right out of the gate though that there's a few pieces of software that you'll need if you want to follow along: Deep Sky Stacker, Adobe Photoshop, and Pixensight. So I understand if this is more of an intermediate to advanced level processing tutorial and you don't have that software and you're not ready to take it on yet, just wanted to get that out of the way. Also, this data was captured with a monochrome astronomy camera through narrowband filters. So it's a different process than say a color DSLR and one-shot color. So hopefully you enjoy this tutorial, you learn a few things and stick to the very end to see the final results. Here we go. So we're going to take a look at the data I collected on the Pelican Nebula and stack that in Deep Sky Stacker to start. Deep Sky Stacker is a free stacking software to calibrate and integrate your image exposures. It may not be the best tool, but it's the one that I still currently use. AstroPixel Processor is another great one to use. That one's a paid one, but we'll go through Deep Sky Stacker for now so you can see how I created my final image. So I'm in Deep Sky Stacker 4.2.6, which is the latest version currently, and that is pretty recent. I think I downloaded about 2 weeks ago, the latest version. So I've got my acquisition data here. Pelican Nebula in HA in 03, so it was over 2 nights that I captured these images. So I'll select the HA files first, open those up, and then I'm going to add the dark frames as well. I only used lights and darks, no flats or bias frames for this project. Let's get the darks in there, so 300 seconds long at minus 16 degrees Celsius. So here we go. An important thing to notice here is the score that Deep Sky Stacker has associated with these images. You can register your images and it runs through the register process, so aligns them all up but doesn't actually stack them, and then you can actually see the scores and take away the ones with a low score because those stars are either going to be out of focus or moving, and then just use your best image frames. That's good practice. I believe all of them are pretty good here. What I usually do is look at the worst one, so the score of 111. I'm just going to turn up the brightness here. Very dim linear exposures here. It's almost completely black. So 111, and then I compare it to the best one here of 209. Yeah, there's not that much of a difference, at least visually. So I'm going to go ahead and stack all of them. So that's night one, and a lot of people ask me about this, how to stack data from multiple nights. In Deep Sky Stacker, it's very, very easy. Of course, you want to make sure that your image is framed up the same way through both nights, or you're going to have a real problem getting them to align. Things are framed up pretty good here, and there's a little bit of overlappage, but you'll see what I mean. So here's night one in the main group. I'm just going to go to the next tab, group 1, and then add the second nights. And we're just doing the HA here, not the 03. So I'm going to go to night 2 and select the HA frames here. So I'll open those, and again, you see those scores. They're pre-populated because I've already stacked these images. Normally you'll have to register your images before you see those scores appear. All pretty good. We're getting higher scores than we did the night before. I'm wondering if the focus was just a little bit better on the second night, or maybe the transparency was better. Either way, those all look great. I'm just gonna add the dark frames in. I'm not even sure if I collected new darks for this night. Oh, it looks like I did. About 10. So they're the same temperature, and it says 03 there because that's the filter that was in there when I took the darks, but of course the lens cap was on, so it doesn't matter which filter, it's just a dark frame. So there you go, I've got my 2 nights worth of images. Some settings that you want to pay attention to here. In this options dialog box here, raw fits DDP settings. One thing you want to make sure is that if you've been stacking one-shot color data, you might have this box checked. Monochrome 16-bit fits are raw files created by a DSLR or color CCD camera. When I use a one-shot color camera or my DSLR, that box is checked. You want to make sure that is unchecked if you're using a monochrome camera like I am here. That's the case. So bilinear interpolation works well on this. You can experiment with the AHD if you don't like the result that Deep Sky Stacker spits out here, but these are the settings I'm using for now, and we're going to keep that. You just hit apply for good measure. And then we're gonna check all, so all the lights and darks are checked, and we're gonna go into stack checked pictures. Here we go, we can see that it's gonna say that we should be using bias and flat frames. Slap on the wrist there, and we're gonna get 3 hours of total exposure in HA. It's worth looking into the stacking parameters. I am going to drizzle these images, 2 times drizzle, so it's gonna make the image twice the size. And I believe that drizzle is only effective if you dithered your image during the image acquisition stage. But if you're auto guiding, chances are you are dithering your images, that simple step to create a better image. So none of the other settings are changed in here from the default Kappa Sigma clipping. It's great because I am using the latest version of Deep Sky Stacker. It just reset all the default settings, so you don't have to worry about me changing any subtle details there. Okay, so we're gonna stack this image of 3 hours of the Pelican Nebula in HA, and then I'm gonna go through and do O3 next. The H-alpha exposures are stacked now, and the final image is nothing to look at right now. Just basically a black image with a couple of white dots. Now here is where it gets interesting. So I've been playing with Pixensight, the paid software, because it was just too powerful to ignore for this long. So I have been using Pixensight for some very selective processes of my astrophotography images. And now I do have my premium astrophotography processing guide. I'll leave a link in the description for that. But there is no Pixensight in that guide because it is still so new to me. I'm definitely not in a position to be teaching others about it when I'm still learning that software myself. I feel very comfortable with Photoshop, but Pixensight is still new. But I will show you the new techniques I've been using, largely thanks to my friend Jeff Horn, who showed me a lot of great tips. We sat down for an afternoon and really explored Pixensight. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is just pull up this stacked image that I just did. So it is called autosave.tiff, and it's in this folder, 518 Pelican Nebula, acquisition data. Okay, here is the stacked H-alpha linear file, again that black file, but this is the funnest part by far of the entire image processing stage, is clicking the auto stretch button. And it's right here with that little nuclear symbol. And there you go, look at that image. So that's one click. This is just an auto stretch preview to show you the data that's in your image, but it's handy to have that one-click stretch as opposed to pulling at it in Photoshop as I normally would to get a preview for the image. So we haven't changed it yet, but we do have a preview showing that yes, this data looks mouth-watering. So I'm going to go back into Deep Sky Stacker and do the exact same thing I just did with the H-alpha, but for the O3. So there's nothing new to show you there, just getting all the O3 frames, looking at the score and stacking them, and then we'll have these 2 files to play with, and we're going to combine them. Today's video is sponsored by Canva. Now, probably a lot of you don't know this, but I used to be a graphic designer, and I remember back in the day I looked at Canva as something you used to, if you didn't have a background in graphic design, you want to create an infographic, you use Canva and you can make some kind of cool, nifty designs, but you could kind of tell that it was like this boxed in template design. Well, that has all changed. Canva does a lot more than little graphics and infographics now. You can do videos and presentations and social media posts and all the stuff that, you know, you see these successful creators doing. It looks like they have like a full team behind them of designers creating this stuff, but you'd be surprised at what you can do in Canva. So it's something that I'm using now, the Canva Pro account, and I want you guys to be in on this too. So if you click the link in the description, you get an extended 45-day free trial of a Canva Pro account. So thank you, Canva, for sponsoring this video, and have fun. Aren't you so glad I introduced Canva to you?
I showed you Canva like 5 years ago.
All right, so the same process was applied to the O3 and the stacking from DSS, the multiple nights with the tabs there. Now let's take a look at this O3 file, which it's named autosave001.tiff. We're going to go into Pixensight and open that up and put it in the same folder. And I'm again going to use that auto stretch function just to preview what we've got in there. Here we go. Okay, so you know, a surprising amount of detail for O3. A lot of times the difference between the O3 and the HA is drastic. The stars are a lot fatter in that, which is something we're going to have to deal with there too. So there's my O3 on the left and my HA on the right. Now we're going to go through the process of aligning these images together using Adobe Photoshop. Now there are ways to do this in Pixensight, but for now I prefer to do it in Photoshop, and maybe you will too. So we have our preview stretched HA and O3 images here now, the O3 on the left and the HA on the right. Now there's a very powerful tool called StarNet++, and I've talked about it before, and if you're not using this tool, you really should for astrophotography. It's just so handy. So what we're going to do is remove the stars from both of these images at this stage. So we can turn off that auto stretch by hitting the cross sign here. I'm going to turn them both off, and I'm actually going to do an actual stretch to these images using the screen transfer function. If you've never done this process in Pixensight, it's one of the most simple actions to take. It's widely used, and it's found here in the All Processes screen transfer function. Looks like this. And then you'll also want your histogram transformation window open. There we go. So with my O3, we'll start with open. I'm going to press again this nuclear icon, the auto stretch, and it's going to blast out the details there and actually do a good job of not pulling the stars with it. But to apply that, I need to make sure I'm on the right file here. Auto save 1. You're going to drag the little triangle down here and then press the square to run it. Good old Pixensight. And again, whoa, white image, what are we seeing here? We're seeing the preview on top of the stretch, so we need to turn the preview stretch off. Now this is the actual image we have here, so we can save it in this state. So I'm just going to save this file. I'm going to call it O3 stretch 1. Save it as a 32-bit file. We'll be changing that to 16-bit after, unfortunately, but for now it's 13-bit in all its glory. And we're going to do the exact same thing now to the HA exposure, integration I should say. Now depending on your computer, some of these actions might take a while to complete. It's very processor intensive. So again, let's just grab the screen transfer functions there, and then autosave is the file we want. And I will press this icon here, boom, bring the triangle down, square, turn that off, and now we've got this file ready to save. Save as HA stretch 1. So we've got our two stretched files. Now we're going to remove those stars from the image. We'll put them back afterwards, but we want to get them on as two separate layers. Very, very powerful technique. Okay, so we'll start with the HA, and you have to install it in the right folder in your computer. There's tutorials on how to do this. This is one of the things that my friend Jeff walked me through, was getting StarNet integrated into Pixensight, but if you do some searching, you'll find out exactly what you need to do here. And it is now an option here in the processes. It's called StarNet, and you want to make sure that Create Star Mask is checked. And we can apply hitting the square button, and this is going to take some time. It's going to carefully decide what the stars are in the image, do its best anyway, and remove them into its own layer. Then we'll have the star layer and the starless layer. Plus is finally finished, and we are delivered with the starless version and then a star layer. And look at that starless version. It's just an incredible looking image. That beautiful data in H-alpha. This is where when I said, the ASI 2600mm Pro, the dynamic range and just the resolution is just mind-blowing at how great these images look. So that's the power of StarNet++ too, to get that separation of the stars from the base nebula image. So we're going to do the exact same thing on the O3 now. And yeah, like I said, it takes a while. It's 20 minutes in between recording here, so I'm going to start the O3 now. StarNet has finished its process on the O3 data, so we now have the HA images, the O3 stacked image with the stars separated on each. Now here's where we're going to go back into Photoshop to combine the images and align them and associate them with the color channels to create a full color image. There are ways to do this in Pixensight, but again, like I said, this is something I personally prefer to do in Photoshop at this stage, although maybe down the road it's something I'll do in Pixensight itself because there are some great tools for that. So I'll just save these images now so I can bring them into Photoshop. My HA stretch, I'm just going to save that as HA stretch starless. And then I'll save the star mask as HA stretch mask. And I'll do the same thing for the O3 stack and bring it into Photoshop. Okay, we're in Adobe Photoshop now, and I have those images we created in Pixensight as layers in a single image here in Photoshop. So if you look at my layers palette, you can see I've named them all so we can keep things organized. We've got the O3 starless image on the bottom, the stars themselves from that image on top of that. Then we've got the HA starless image and the HA stars on top of that. And if you notice those little chain link icons, that's because those layers are linked and they will move together, which is really important because we're trying to line things up. The only reason these stars are here right now is because they're useful reference points to align them so we can put those color channels in the right place. So if we look here at the bottom, we can turn the star layer on and off on the O3, but there's a blend mode where you can actually see the stars through with the nebula through it. So that blend mode is linear dodge add. Now we can see them both together. I'll do the same thing with the HA starless image and the stars on top of there. And now we have both linked layers on top of each other. Now I've lined them up already by slightly moving them around using the move tool, but I just want to show you how I accomplished that. So if I go to this HA starless layer, which is on top of the O3 layer, and bump the opacity down to 0, but I have the star layer still at 100%, you'll see when I use the move tool to move it around, see those stars moving around? They're moving around with that starless layer as well. We can't see it because we've turned it down to 0%, but it is moving around with it. And we know those are aligned, so if we line up this star layer on top of the other star layer from the O3, we'll know that our starless images are completely lined up. Now this might take a bit of time and you might need to zoom in, but I'm just using the arrow keys on my keyboard and the move tool, and you should get things to line up perfectly. If there was a lot of rotation or your framing was off, this will be a lot more difficult, but hopefully if you shot it during the same session or if you use plate solving, you should be right in the same area, which makes it very easy. So we can confirm that we've got things lined up properly by turning the starless layer all the way back up to 100%, and then I'm going to turn both of these star layers off, and we're just going to see the starless data on top of each other. So we've got the O3 on the bottom. Watch what happens when I turn the HA off. You can see it's totally lined up, but it's separating those gases of the O3 and the HA. Very interesting, fun time to play with the image. It's like, okay, so there's the areas of hydrogen, or in this case right now, the oxygen, and now the hydrogen. It's very different. So those are the layers we're going to use to assign to colors to create our full color image, and this is where it gets really interesting. This is a really exciting stage of the process because you finally get to see your color image. So seeing as how we shot through only 2 narrowband filters, O3 and HA, we didn't shoot S2, so we're not going to be able to create that Hubble palette image with dedicated channels to each, but we can create an HOO image, which is a popular color palette, and it turns out really nice on emission nebula, like the Pelican Nebula. So the H alpha goes to the red, and then the O3 goes to the green and blue channels. What you're looking at here is that palette in action. So if we go into the channels here, you'll see that the red channel, this is our H alpha, all I did was copy and paste our H alpha image into the red channel of a new image. Then if we go to green, that's our O3, and blue, again, our O3. Now you can leave the green and blue as they are, but I would probably suggest, in this case, to boost up that blue and bump down the green just to achieve kind of a pleasing look. So here's what we start out with, which is already a super exciting image. Of course, it's starless. We don't have that star layer on right now, which is super important that we're playing with this data without bringing the stars along with us at this stage. So I have a pretty intense set of layers in here. My first layer here is just that RGB layer. It's got those channels in there, the HOO. And then I pulled out each channel as its own layer to play with that individually. So here's the red. And what I did was go into Adobe Camera Raw, which is a very powerful set of tools in Photoshop. So you just find that in Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And then here's where you'll be able to do things like anything from sharpening to noise reduction to curves to clarity and dehaze are some of my favorites. If you look at what's happening with the clarity slider, very powerful stuff there for achieving a high dynamic range. And all of this is possible because the data is so great captured with this ASI 2600mm Pro. And this is probably the biggest reason, or it is the biggest reason why this is probably my best photo to date, because the data is the highest quality I've ever taken. Thanks largely to the camera sensor in the ASI 2600 and that 3nm chroma filter I'm using. So these are the kinds of adjustments you can make in Adobe Camera Raw. I'll just cancel this. This is what I ended up with after making Camera Raw filter effects to my red channel. Here's the green after that. My slight adjustments to the green channel, the blue channel, my slight adjustments there, and you can see I pulled that blue up a little bit more to get the look I want. When I put them all back together in the channels, RGB, this is the image I've ended up with. So if we look at a before and after, making those Camera Raw adjustments to each layer individually, each channel individually, quite a dramatic difference and a very different looking image overall. Then, with this color image, you can directly apply more Camera Raw, Adobe Camera Raw edits, and this is what I did there. So I call this the color enhanced version. I applied some of those things, clarity, played with the curves a little bit in Adobe Camera Raw on the full color image as a whole. Then I thought the image was getting a little bit red and there was a little too much blue, so I adjusted the levels here, kind of adjusted that black point. If you're new to image processing and things like black point are still foreign to you, I urge you to check out my image processing guide where I go really beginner level stuff close to where I'm at now. So that's that version, and this image excites me as it is here. But then the cherry on top is to pull that red H-alpha layer, this one, and apply that as a luminance layer on top. And look at the subtle dramatic difference that makes. So all you do for a luminance layer, if it was a normal layer, you could see this black and white H-alpha. You set the blend mode to luminosity, and just like that at 100%, I really do like the way that looks, but I actually bumped it down to about 60%, and it just made that pop. I love the way this looks. And if you want to add those stars back in, I mean, people do like starless images. I prefer to actually have stars in the image most times. So to finalize things, there's that star layer, which of course lines up perfectly because we kept it in the same orientation. We can turn it on. I chose the H-alpha stars. They're not the natural colors, they're just white stars, but that layer is on top of the color image with the blend mode set to linear dodge add. So many different things you can do in between where I got to here, including making those stars smaller if you want to before putting them on. So now we're going to hop into Pixensight. I'll show you how to do that and some final tweaks to this image to really make it, So you'll probably want to save the image in this format with all those layers so you can go back and make adjustments, non-destructive workflow. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to flatten the image. And this is where we're going to crop it to. You can see there is some overlap here where my frames didn't line up between filters, and of course that white bar at the top. So I'll just use the crop tool and crop the image in just to frame it up nicely. If you did a good job in the acquisition stage, you won't need to crop up very much if you framed your image between filters up nicely. Okay, so we'll crop it right here, press enter. We've got close to what our final image is gonna look like, and I'll just save it in the folder here, color as a TIFF. And now I'm gonna go into Pixensight, open our color image. Here's some really cool things you can do. So there's a few tools that my good buddy Jeff taught me that I like to use, some finishing touch stuff in Pixensight that I like to use. One of them is already open here. It's called Morphological Transformation. Now you may want to use this tool just on your star layer itself to shrink those stars. It erodes the stars and gets them smaller, which is a pleasing effect most of the time. You can use it on the image with your nebula in there too, and the stars. I'm just going to show you kind of what this filter does in action, but I do recommend running it on the star layer independently from your main image, but I just wanted to show you this here. So I've got it set to the absolute default settings, and you'll find that that's the way I use Pixensight a lot right now, is just at the default settings. The amount starts by default at 1.0. I find it to be a bit aggressive, and it really just chunks away those stars and just almost removes them completely. I run it at 50%, so at 0.5, and then when I run it here, pressing the square, you'll see the difference. 77%. Okay, so you know, just right off the bat, out of the gate, looking at it here, it does look like an improvement, a more dramatic image, but of course we can do the before and after to see what it did. So it did, if we zoom in, it did erode those stars, which is always nice. But it also, you know, affected our nebulosity here in some of the dark dust, and it softened things up and things kind of grew. So in this case, I'm not going to run it, but it's a useful tool. You should check out the Morphological Transformation, especially for eroding your star layer independently. So that's one of them. And then another one that I wanted to show you that's really cool is the HDR Multiscale Transform. This one is very interesting. It's a very dramatic effect and very experimental in my experiences. So I'm gonna leave it again on the default setting. You can, you know, play around with your heart's delight. I'll run the filter here, and this is gonna add some crazy details to it and really find some dynamic range in the image that you may not have thought to pull out yourself manually in Photoshop. So this always dulls the color of the image, I find. But if we go in here, so I've ran the filter here. So this is probably a good spot to check out what it's done, because there's some varying contrasts of brightness here. If we look at the before and after, it's pulled some of these subtle areas of dust in kind of those mid-range areas. So what I always do with this tool, let's just get back out. I save a version just called Details. So I've got my HDR Multiscale Transform detail layer, and then I open it in Photoshop. This is a ninja trick. I can't believe I'm sharing this. I copy this layer onto our original. And then you might want to, because it did dull those colors a little bit, you might want to just increase the vibrance and the saturation, just so it's not as dramatic. So we've got this pretty wild detail layer here. Make adjustments to it beforehand if you want. That was a little too aggressive. Let's just go back here. We'll just use it as is. I'll put my original layer on top, and now in those areas where you think you can recover some of that dynamic range and those really important details, you can use the eraser brush or spend time creating a mask if you want, but I like to just reveal some of those details from behind my main image, and it's a very subtle effect. So I'm using it, let's get the right layer here. I'll turn the opacity of the eraser down to 30%, and we're just subtly clicking away and revealing details in some of these really key areas. Again, you'll probably want to adjust that detail layer to get that vibrance and those colors right before you do it. But if you can really get in there and start revealing some of those areas, Probably best to create a really nice mask too, where you just have the bright areas and removing those detailed areas, but creating that detail layer and revealing it in the areas where it needs it is a very powerful technique and something I've been experimenting with and really find it powerful. So we'll go back to Pixensight, to our regular color image. And this is the term that everyone likes to throw around that's a Pixensight user, something that scared me to use it because I just didn't understand what it meant. I still don't know exactly what it means. It's the deconvolution, which I wish they would just call it what it is, sharpening. It sharpens your image. Now there's a lot of things you can do to control the way it handles the stars in your image and the de-ringing and everything. And you should probably check out Sean Nielsen, Visible Dark Astro. His YouTube channel, he's got a lot of in-depth stuff on Pixensight. But I found that using deconvolution in the default settings can have a really nice effect. So definitely try it out. Here's what it does. It's going to do 10 iterations. And this really does sharpen better than any other sharpening tool I've ever done in Photoshop. And because I really haven't refined it before running it, I like to, again, use it as maybe a 15%, 20% layer on my main image. So let's look at the before and after. Oh, so subtle, but man, you can really see the difference in the sharpness of these areas of dark dust. It's a really magical tool. So you can experiment with that, but even I was so surprised that in its default setting, it works really, really well. This is pretty close to the final image that I shared in my last video. So hopefully those tips sunk in. I didn't move along too fast. I didn't mumble too much, and that you got something out of this video and the way I now use Photoshop and Pixensight together to create really dramatic looking images. So this is the HOO palette bicolor image using narrowband data from the city. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to check out my image processing guide for more in-depth and more beginner level stuff start to finish, you can always check out that. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, clear skies.